Welcome to The Curated Craftsman, a podcast where we'll learn about the hands, head, and heart behind creative entrepreneurs just like you. Kate Cook is the artistic drive behind Asphalt Canvas Custom Art and your host for this conversation about art, business, and belief.
Hey guys, thank you for joining me on the Curated Craftsman podcast. I'm excited today because I have an artist here with me that I've always admired ever since I saw his artwork in person at the SEMA Art Walk. It's been a few years ago now. His name is James Owens. He goes by Jim. James Owen is an internationally recognized self-taught oil painter born and educated in Detroit, Michigan, the Motor City, to a family that's been building cars since 1926. After graduating with a BA in illustration from the Center of Creative Studies, he began his artistic career in advertising business, creating automotive illustrations for large agencies such as W.D. Donner, Walter Thompson, and Campbell Ewald. Today, James makes his home with his wife Kathleen in Mesa, Arizona, and drives a 1952 Hudson Coupe. He is widely recognized for his vintage tiki-inspired aesthetic and his green girl paintings, which have become any mid-century modern's collector's must-have. Thanks for joining us, James.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I want to kind of start from the beginning, where your family from, what they did, if they were supportive of your artistic abilities. We'll start there and then kind of move through your timeline. So your family was into building cars since 1926?
So my grandfather on my mother's side was from Cincinnati, but moved to Detroit in the 20s. And he worked as a tool and die maker at the Ford Rouge plant. He worked for Ford as a tool and die maker from 1926 to 1966. My grandfather on the other side, my dad's side, had been a farmer. That side of the family was from Tennessee, and he'd been a farmer. But when World War II broke out, he was making ammunition for the war, but the chemicals were getting in his skin and killing him. So he couldn't work in the ammunition plant in Tennessee. And the only other work that was available was in Detroit. There was a lot of industry work there. So my family ended up in Detroit for work. Like many Southern people, they took what was called the Hillbilly Highway and went north for work. There's a Dwight Yoakam song about the Hillbilly Highway.
Yes, I've heard that.
So Detroit is a company town. If you live in Detroit, you are some way your business is attached to the automotive industry. Mm-hmm. And that included my dad, who eventually worked for and retired from Ford. My cousins worked for General Motors. My brother retired from General Motors. Huh. But when I graduated high school in the early 80s, there weren't any jobs to be had, really. My dad wasn't the kind of person that was going to have a young, healthy male sitting around doing nothing. So I applied to art school, and it was either get into art school or join the military. But I wanted to marry my current wife, my only wife. I wanted to get married. We met very young, and we knew we wanted to get married. And so it was get a job and get married and get out of the house. Yes. Well, I got accepted into art school. So we dated while I went to art school. And my parents were extremely supportive of my art career. They're a very creative family. My dad was not what you would call an artist, but he could make anything.
Yes.
And my mom was very creative, as was her mother and my other aunts on that side. In fact, one of my aunts is turning 90 this year, and she's an artist, went to art school in the 50s. And I always thought she was the coolest thing on the planet, because she lived in Chicago while we were in Detroit, and she would come in like driving a little like Triumph sports car in the 60s in like That's mod awesome. Boots and a mini dress, and I just thought she was like the coolest thing, and I was like, I want to be an artist, you know.
Wow.
And so she's still an artist. She's going to turn 90 this year. But yeah, the family was very supportive. My folks took on extra work to put me through art school. I worked nights. My wife worked nights. We both worked at a hotel working nights. My money was going towards art school. Her money was being saved for when we could put on a wedding and get our first apartment. But I would not be doing what I'm doing today without the support of my parents or my wife. I always say, when you're an artist, you're either rolling in money or looking for it. And when the times when I was looking for it, she never, wagged her finger and said, you need to get out and get a real job. None of that, So she's always been extremely supportive. And to this day, When we do shows, she's right there by my side.
Yeah, I feel like our spouses don't understand what they sign up for when it comes to the show concept. Me and Bo are kind of talking about that because my poor husband is always like the guy behind the scenes, lifting and lugging and talking to customers about my artwork. I think he probably knows more about my artwork than I do sometimes. So,
Yeah, and it's funny because Kathleen she's more introverted than I am. I'm a
okay.
social butterfly,
Yeah,
but boy, she'll people come in the booth and she'll talk to people about the art and
that's
yeah.
awesome. Normally, I get to this question way later, but you obviously come from a line of legitimate craftsmen, like tool and die makers, in my opinion, are like the epitome of a craftsman. My grandfather was a blacksmith, and he came from a blacksmith family, and then he ended up going into doing that kind of trade as well. Would you say that you, as an artist, are a craftsman, or do you think that there's a differentiation between artists and craftsmen?
Whether someone is labeled a craftsman or labeled an artist, there's a bit of both in each.
Mm,
Because it's my belief that art is in the head and craftsmanship is in the hands.
yes.
So the art part is the ability to create things in any medium,
Yes.
whereas craftsmanship is a more studied technical expertise.
Yes.
For instance, with oil painting. Of course, the art part comes through the design and the layout and the choices of colors and things.
Yes.
The craftsmanship part comes from taking a pile of ground up color mixed in some kind of binder and pushing it around on a piece of stretched cloth with a stick with hair tied to the end. I mean, you have to learn how to master those tools,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
think craftsmen usually, I mean, they might be good at a lot of things, but true craftsmen are really excellent at like one thing. The Japanese are the perfect example of that.
Mm,
I mean, you
yes.
go on YouTube and there's so many videos of like, bonsai scissor maker, and his family's been making them for 100 years. Or
That is so true. I think about like the potters in that culture of like, it's like generation after generation after doing the
yes,
same types of, beautifully handcrafted pots. But
yes.
they're usually for function over like just an artistic thing you set on a shelf.
I love design of any sort, especially functional design. Like
Yes.
off the top of my head, like saddlebags and saddles. I mean, I stopped in a place that makes saddles out here in Phoenix one time just to watch the guy make the saddle. It's a sculpture, but it's a craft as well. And just
Yes.
really beautiful to watch someone who knows their business go after it.
Yes.
And I've always strived to, not always, I was a lazy young man and a lazy artist when I first started, but I strive now to be a man who knows his business.
Yes. So how do you define what makes good craftsmanship, in general or in an oil painting? Like what do you think makes for good craftsmanship or poor craftsmanship if you want to go that route?
Patience.
Oh, that's so good. Yes.
Patience and a work ethic are the key to good craftsmanship.
Yes. Oh man,
Because,
yes.
like, to give you an example, the way I create a painting. So a lot of times people will ask me, how long does it take you to do a painting? And I tell them it's a very difficult question to answer because I do so much preliminary work, be it drawing or photographing or hunting up scrap to draw from,
Yes.
and then I build these comps. I build color comps in the computer. And I used to do it traditionally where I would do little color studies, but now I do it in the computer because I have a big Wacom tablet that I can draw on. It's so easy to make changes and make color decisions and move things around with the layout. So I will spend 3 or 4 times the time designing it than I do painting it. But
Mm,
that's because I'm solving all the problems in my studies.
yes.
Because when I sit down to paint on the canvas, I want to know where I'm going. And with all the problems solved, I can more deftly put down each brush stroke and when the painting is done, it doesn't look overworked, or we all know how quickly a painting can get muddy. It looks fresh. It's got
Yes.
energy to the brush strokes. that only comes from doing the preliminary work.
Basically, like a good painting comes down to a good skeleton, is what I've learned over and over again with these conversations. And kind of what you're saying is very similar to that. You know, as a commission artist too, here, it's like all of the work is 90%. And then the painting itself, once you have all of the preliminary stuff done and you know what the customer wants, it's only 10%.
I call it the heavy lifting.
Yes, because it is. It's the hardest part.
Yeah, the design work it's the hardest part. It's the heavy lifting. So coming up with a good idea, coming up with a good design to execute that idea, and then working the finessing of color placement and, you know, color harmony and just color choices. All of that is very, very taxing.
Yes.
And it requires a great deal of concentration. Whereas when all of those problems are solved and I can sit down and push that goo around with my stick with hair tied to the end, then that's my happy place. I love painting. I don't love designing, although I do like it. I like good design, and I've studied design for years. Like, I would just sit with my laptop on my lap while I'm watching TV, and I would surf poster sites and heritage auctions there in Texas that sells old movie posters and vintage illustration and stuff. And I would spend hours on there, and I would find like an old movie poster from the 30s or 40s or something, and I would just look at it. And if it moved me, I would keep it sometimes and open it up and study it and go, why does this piece of art move me? And try to figure out, what is it about this? Is it the color? Is it the design? Is it just the look of on the face of the people that were rendered in it? And try to figure out what is it that's moving me about this? And then try to just absorb that.
Yes. I totally resonate with that.
Yeah, because you're right. It's the skeleton. You know, I had a teacher in art school tell me, your finished piece will never be any better than your original drawing. And my wife calls me an art snob, because if I go and look at a piece of art and the perspective is wrong on things, even though it might be beautifully rendered, it just drives me crazy. I can't stand it.
These days, a lot of people are looking at social media, doing what you were doing on your laptop with posters. And I actually equate some of my style through going on social media and very much curating the feed that I'm seeing, because I know that that's very much like influencing my decisions and my art making. In fact, I just realized this a couple days ago, that a lot of my favorite paintings recently are in a perfectly square shape, which I kind of hate, but I also love, because the reason I think I did that is because I'm constantly looking at that Instagram square. And I just wonder if there's like a subconscious correlation between the two. But
I bet there is.
I think there is too. It's informed my artwork in a positive way, and I'm sure there are definitely negatives to some things that I've seen that I have applied to my art, but I've done the same thing where I've looked at people like you and Max Grundy and the people I have actually interviewed on this or plan to. Why do I like this piece of artwork? And you're so right at dissecting it like a scientist.
I was trained as a product illustrator. And in Detroit, that means I was painting photorealistic airbrush cutaways of shock absorbers and carburetors and transmission parts and stuff like that. That's what I was trained to do. And I loved it. I loved the airbrush, but I found that it was very time consuming, and I could make as much money doing other techniques as I could doing that.
Okay.
And so it started me out. So I started as an illustrator, not as an art director in the agencies. And Detroit was interesting because they would have studios around town that would have 5 or 10 or 12 artists on staff that were illustrators. They weren't designers. And that was the greatest training ground you could ever have, because the art directors would come from the agencies to us, and they would bring, in those days, there was a big thick book. It was like 3-4 inches thick. It was called the Showcase book. And this was a book that illustrators and artists would advertise in, and they'd have different pictures of their work so that art directors around the country and the world could call them up and say, hey, I love your style. Do this for me. Well, the art directors would come to us, open that book, point to a picture and go, can you do this in this style? And we'd be like, yes, we can. Then they would leave and we would freak out. We'd start analyzing the style. There were like 8 of us on staff there. And between all of us, somebody had done something similar. And they were the most generous artists ever known. and they were unassuming. If you saw them in an elevator, you might think they were an accountant, but
Yeah.
they were the most talented artists that I've known in my entire life. And they were young guys. These guys, I don't think any of us were over 30, but they were smoking good and no egos. We worked together like this. It was incredible. And they would help you. They would guide you, give you suggestions. Okay, so I was working at this studio. The studio serviced WB Donor, Campbell Ewald, these big ad agencies that were doing all of the ads for General Motors and Chrysler and Ford. And so I've done hundreds and hundreds of storyboard frames in marker for car commercials. I've done point of purchase displays. I did cartoon work. I've done watercolor work, any kind of medium you can think of. I did because I worked there. I've done pen and ink. I've done like fake woodcut. You name it. I've done it because of that place. Now I was lazy and I was a newlywed. I just wanted to be home with my wife, but the advertising business requires incredible hours. I tell everybody it's a soul crushing, marriage destroying business.
Yes, I've seen Mad Men.
Yes. My boss took me to celebrate my 1-year anniversary at the studio to an old restaurant in the Penobscot building in Detroit, where all of these old, like picture Don Draper in his 50s, that it was full of Don Drapers in their 50s. It was,
Love that.
I'll never forget
That
it.
is way cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, I don't mean to say this to insult you, but when you're doing those like product illustrations over and over and over again, did you ever get burnt out on just not having really like creative freedom, I guess?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
You get cynical about art.
Yes.
And so I held the gift that God gave me cheap
Mm.
to the point where I got so burnt out that I quit.
Mm.
And I didn't want to be an artist anymore. And there was a point where I didn't draw or paint anything for a year.
Dang, that's a long time.
I wanted nothing to do with it. I was just I didn't like the ad business. I was miserable. I made good money.
How long did you work at the ad place?
So I worked at the studio 7-8 years, maybe. I was freelancing at the same time. So I was making money hand over fist through my freelancing and through moving up in the ranks at the studio. I was making really good money, but I was not happy.
Yeah.
And my wife wasn't happy.
Hmm.
Even the most understanding spouse in the world, when you've told her you've done nothing all week because no jobs came in, and then Friday night you got to call her and say, yeah, I know it's your mom's birthday party, but I got to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tough.
It's hard. It's very hard.
So how did you pull yourself out of burnout? Like when so you didn't have a job for a year, or were you just kind of doing like freelance gigs here and there?
Honestly, I went and sold cotton candy in a flea market. That's how sick of the art world I was.
Wow. Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, but I know just to kind of make ends meet, I'm sure from point A to point B, were you a man of faith at that time? Like, were you kind of like mad at God while that was happening in your burnout?
No, I was a man of faith. I was not raised a man of faith, but
Okay.
I came to meet the Lord in my early 20s.
Okay.
And I just always felt like the Lord was going to work everything out.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I wasn't scared. I wasn't afraid to work. It was
Hmm.
just finding the right thing that I wanted to do. So
Yeah.
I did start freelancing again because I knew I could make good money doing it. So I did it, but I was doing it kind of on my own terms, and I would
Okay.
work with the clients that I wanted to work with.
Okay. And what were
But
you making? Like, what were you still doing, like illustrative product stuff, or what were you doing freelancing?
I was doing a lot of storyboard work.
Okay. Okay.
I got really fast at storyboards with markers. Then my life took another left turn because I was driving down the road one day and there was this awful radio commercial came on, and I was like shaking my finger at the radio going, that guy's awful. I could do that better.
Okay.
So boom, a light bulb went off in my head, and I got with some of my contacts through the ad world, and they put me with a guy who was a recording engineer, and he helped me put together a voiceover tape.
Okay.
And every time I would go meet with an art director to show my portfolio, I'd say, oh, by the way, I do voiceover work, and leave a tape. This was back in the cassette days. This had been
Yeah.
in the mid 90s.
Okay.
And so one day I stopped in and met a designer and showed her my portfolio, and we hit it off. And I said, "Oh, by the way, I do voiceover work." She goes, "Oh," she's looking at it. She goes, my husband's a director. I'll give this to him." 2 weeks later, he calls me, and I went and I did a half a dozen commercials in one sitting. It was a regional department store. He says, "Who's your agent?" And I said, "Well, I don't have an agent." He says, "Well, you got to have an agent." He says,
Yeah.
"I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to bill this through Talent Trek. So you need to call and introduce yourself to them." So I made my agent money before I even met them.
Oh my gosh.
I went down to meet these agents, and all I had was the voiceover tape because I was really overweight at the time, and I started losing my hair early. In my 20s, I started losing my hair. And she says, "Well, you need to get us a headshot and a resume." And I said, "Well, how much work is there for a bald fat guy?" She did that. She laughed and she said, "Well, I don't know. Let's find out." Well, 2 weeks later, I booked a national commercial for Dollywood, and it made me SAG eligible, which is the Screen Actors Guild.
Yes.
And I started working like crazy between Knoxville, Nashville, Atlanta, Birmingham, Alabama, up to Cincinnati. I was doing all kinds of radio and television commercials and industrial films. It finally led us to Los Angeles. The thing about the acting world is that you can make really good money if you can stay busy, but the trick is staying busy. I was having dinner with a friend, and he says, "Oh, I have a friend who, works at this entertainment company. They're looking for an art director." And I was like, ah. And all I had was visions of the ad business again. And I was like, oh, I don't want it. No, I'm not interested. And he told me how much they were paying. I said, "Give him my number."
Yeah. And so just to clarify, this was in that little time frame that you weren't at the ad agency and you were kind of in between?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So from the time I quit the studio in Detroit, I had moved to Tennessee. I started freelancing again in Tennessee, and then I started acting, and the acting really took off. And so we decided, if we're going to give this acting thing a go, it's kind of like move to New York or move to Los Angeles. My wife and I both despise snow. So we're like, Los Angeles it is. So we ended up in LA, and I did some work. I did 23 or 4 episodes of General Hospital. I did a national commercial for Home Depot.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did work. I just couldn't work enough. So when this art director job came up, I took it because I needed the money. That put me in a position where I wasn't illustrating, I was designing. And that kind of sparked a deeper love in me for good design. I wasn't executing the stuff really, I was designing it. Being from Detroit, I love cars. I used to play a game in the car with my dad. I'd say, "Dad, what's that?" And he'd tell me, "Oh, that's a 57 Mercury." Well, I went through this period where I was in art school, and I went to, I worked at the studio, and I was doing all this other stuff where there was no room in my life for vintage cars at all. But then when I was living in LA, I started hitting the car shows, the Pomona shows,
There's a lot of good ones out there.
Johnny Carson Park, because I lived in Burbank. And oh my gosh, this fire just lit in me. And I saw Keith Wiesner's work, and I saw Tom Fritz's work.
Oh, I love Tom Fritz's.
And I was blown away.
Yes.
I thought, I might like to do that. So I'm working at this entertainment company as their art director, and I'm falling in love with art again.
Wow.
And the interesting thing that happened was, and this happens quite often with entertainment companies in LA, is they ran out of money. So they laid everybody off.
Oh my God. Right when you were just getting back into how frustrating.
I had a year's worth of unemployment coming to me. So I said, I'm going to give this hot rod art a go. And so I took that unemployment money and I went in my studio for like 9 months and just started making paintings.
Wow. Talk about serendipity.
No serendipity. It was God.
That's what I was just about to ask you. So you clearly believe that it was God that led you on each one of these little arms off of your journey.
So much so that one time I did a word search study through the Bible looking for the term luck, serendipity, kismet, whatever you want to call it. It does not exist in the Old Testament or the New Testament.
Wow, that's so interesting. Wow,
yes.
That's amazing. So what is your idea on fate? How does that play into your story? You went off on all these small tangents, but they all did tie back together in some way. Do you believe that there's a sense of fate in that, or?
I don't believe in fate as in everything that happens is destined to happen because we have a free will. God has a plan for our lives,
Yes.
but we can screw that plan up.
Yes, because of our free will.
Right. I believe in miraculous healing, but I'm not going to go step in front of a bus either.
Absolutely. And you can definitely relate that back to your career. It was your choice to step into that role of artistic director. It was your choice to take that unemployment and use it as a good thing to benefit your artistic career and not just sit on the couch and wait for something to come to you.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I went and I would recon and spy on like, okay, how's Keith Wiesner doing this? How's Tom Fritz doing this? How's my buddy Doug Horn doing this? And I would just look at how they were presenting their art. When I said that I've done all these different mediums and styles in the ad business, the only one I couldn't do because of its drying time was oil painting.
Okay, good. This is how I wanted to tie this back in because I saw on your website that oil paint was not technically allowed because of the drying time speed, the speed of it. It just wasn't applicable.
It wasn't applicable. So when I started on those first hot rod paintings, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this in acrylic because I'd done a lot of acrylic work and kind of mimicked the look of oil.
And had you ever painted with oil at all?
Just in art school.
Okay.
Just like scrumbling and, the rudimentary stuff they teach you in art school.
Okay,
I started doing them in acrylic and they were not coming out the way I wanted them to look at all. And so dawn breaks on Marblehead and I was like, if I want to paint like my heroes who were the illustrators of the golden era, like J.C. Leyendecker, Norman Rockwell, and my all-time favorite, Haddon Sundblom, who created the Coca-Cola Santa Claus. He was such an influential painter. He taught Gil Elfgren, the pinup artist, how to paint. That's where my current work comes from, is my love for Golden Age illustrators and pulp novel cover illustrators.
Yes.
And the first art books I ever bought with my, 25 cents allowance that I saved up in the 70s were Frank Frazetta books. So these awful paintings that I was starting with the acrylic work, I just knew, okay, this isn't going to work. I have to learn how to work in oils. Well, I didn't even know where to start. I knew so little, I didn't even know what to ask. I went to my library and I started digging through all my books. And the thing you find out about biography of artists, they like to write about the art, but they don't like to write about the artist's daily work habits or their materials.
Yes.
It's very hard to glean what to do from reading an artist's biography, but there'll be little snippets here and there.
There will, yeah, and they're gold when you find them. I remember reading
a
Rockwell biography, and I was, whoa, he struggled with the same thing I struggled with, it's like a small paragraph.
Or he'll maybe list colors he liked to use. I would write this stuff down.
Wow, that's awesome.
Just so I wouldn't forget it. I dove in and started learning and started on these early paintings, doing the best I could.
I do think knowing that how your tools are made and how your medium is made especially when you're a painter. I'm thinking more like wide ranging, but when you're a painter, especially like knowing how your paint is made is so important because no reds are the same. No two reds are the same. Like they're all made with different pigmentation. And so like some red will have a little bit more pink tone or yellow tone to it. And it helps when you're like mixing colors and you're trying to get that certain light. And, you talk about Tom Fritz, like his lighting and his paintings, he's like the Thomas Kinkade of the automotive world.
He is, absolutely.
But yeah, I think that's really cool that you studied the scientific aspect of your tools and knowing how those were made, because not only does that build respect for them and it makes you understand why they're so expensive, but it also helps you learn how to make things with them, So it's really cool.
And it's not really rocket science.
No.
It's just there's a mystery there because no one talks about it, So you have to kind of dig around and
there's not instant gratification. And I'm learning that currently in this current week's project. Like I'm trying something new for the first time and I'm like, wow, it's been a minute since I've learned something.
It feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels good, but man, at first it is frustrating as heck.
Yeah, because you've worked out a system of what you do, and you do it second nature now.
Absolutely.
And when you throw a new wrench into the monkey works, it's like going back to square one.
It is, and it affects like every part of my personal life, because that's all I can think about is like how to solve that creative problem or how, whatever I have going on, I'm learning. It's in my head all the time. So I love it and I hate it.
Yeah, no, I get it. It. I'll feel like I'm stale. I haven't learned anything in a while, and I'll pick up a new hobby or something because I want to stimulate my little gray cells,
Yes. I think that helps with our creativity. You know, the creativity is a skill rather than just something you have. I think it's something that you can really hone in on. And if you're constantly seeking new information, whether it's in your field of artistic career or whatever it may be, you know, like if I'm going to start trying to plant a garden, that's a whole nother thing that I don't know anything about. But I think that that helps your creativity in the long run. And me and Max were talking about that. He's like, I can go build a couch that has nothing to do with this hot rod painting I'm working on, but they actually do. They actually do correlate because while I'm doing that, my mind is resting and I'm able to work, you know, freely on something that doesn't involve a lot of mental effort. But then when I get back to the easel and I'm working on this creative problem, everything's fresh. My mind's, you know, working correctly. And it's just, in some way, there is a correlation between the two creative tasks, even though they aren't the same thing.
And I find most artists are creative in other endeavors as well. Like I can't tell you how many artists I know that are musicians as well.
Yes, that blows my mind too. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so cool.
And even ones that are not like really good, like myself, I dabble,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but I do other things. I like to build things in the garage. I built my Hudson, you know.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because that's a very cool thing for me to learn is when somebody's an artist, but they also have that technical knowledge of car building and fabrication and engine building and things like that. That's very mathematical in my opinion. It's so cool to see people work both sides of their brain like that. And I think that's what makes a really beautiful car.
You talk a lot about the art or craftsmanship. And to me, the art part of the car happens pretty quickly when you design it. And the
Yes,
craftsmanship takes a long time because some of those processes are big and long and heavy. I loved building my car. I bought it in 2013. And just when I bought it, I went to a car show and there was an older gentleman there who had a Hudson Jet. And so I told him, I said, hi, I just bought a Hudson step down coupe. He became like a brother from another mother. And then he introduced me to his best friend. One was a retired race car mechanic. The other one was retired paint and body man. Between these two guys, for the 3 years that I was building my car, I was in school again.
Wow.
And I wouldn't do anything without running it by those guys.
That's
I'd say,
awesome.
here, I'm thinking about doing it this way because this makes sense to me. And they'd say, yeah, do it that way, or think about trying it this way. Yeah, and I did everything on that car. I had that car completely taken apart, every nut and bolt. I painted it in my driveway. I did all the welding and body work. I learned how to weld and do body work. I did the tuck and roll upholstery myself because when I mentioned my parents were supportive and took on extra work while I was in art school, what they did was they had a company sewing slip covers for people's houses for their furniture. I learned how to sew when I was a teenager in art school. And so it's a hop and a skip from a slip cover on a couch to a cover on an automobile. And I didn't build it for speed. It's tail dragger style. It's meant slow and cool. It was a creative outlet that wasn't drawing and painting.
Yes.
And it was like cool water on my brain. I find that, you know, when I do other things that are other hobbies that are not drawing and painting. And that way I stay fresh when I start my work week.
Yes. Yes.
You know?
And so do you have like a 9 to 5 kind of setup as far as work week goes, Monday through Friday, if you can?
I do. A lot of times young artists will come into my booth and they'll ask me, where do I start? I said, first of all, set a time to work.
Absolutely.
And I mean 8 hours.
Yes.
You know, my wife is a bookkeeper. She works from home, but she works for a company in California and we're in Phoenix.
Okay.
But she clocks in at 8:30 in the morning. So she clocks in, I clock in. I knock off at noon, make us some lunch. We have lunch together. We work till, 5:30 or however long. If we have something coming up, we got to work late, we work late. But I work an 8-hour workday every day. I am not a believer in waiting for the muse to show up. And I think this comes from working in advertising where you were expected to deliver, and I mean yesterday. If you missed a deadline, it could be deadly to your career.
That's such a good piece of advice to give to somebody. I mean, I'm only 7 years in to my business, but for all 6 of them up until I had my son, I was painting 8 hours a day straight.
Yeah.
I did not fool around. I was sitting at my easel 8 hours a day, whether it was working for a client or working for myself and getting some paintings out that I wanted to get out for sale.
Yep.
That's such
You
good.
got to treat it like a business.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I think this is a cool question to ask anyone really, but especially artists, is like when you have that kind of drive and you're working those 8-hour days, you don't wait for the muse to show up, but how do you create when you have a life issue happening?
There's two answers to that.
Okay.
One is you suck it up, you be a grown up, you stay up late and you get the job done, as well as whatever that other emergency is. And
Yes.
for an example, I took care of my dad just before he passed for a short while. It wasn't a long time. Like some people do it for years. Mine was just a matter of a couple of months. It wasn't much. But in that time period, a lot of work went on hold. The first answer is suck it up, stay up late, get the job done.
Yeah.
The other answer is sometimes this thing we do comes to a screeching halt for a little while.
Yeah.
But the one thing I've learned as I've gotten older is that nothing stays the same. You work through these hard things, you know,
Yeah.
and you work through the joyous things. I'm sure your son
Yeah.
takes time away from your work because,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know how old he is, but I'm sure he's got things going on. And
Yeah, he's 2. He's just about to
oh,
be
so
2.
he's busy then.
He's a busy dude, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, you will learn to work around these things, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think for me, you know, and not to answer my own question, but for me, in hearing what you were saying, it took me a long time to learn that when a devastating situation happens, like what you went through with your dad, or any sort of death or awful things like that, and you have to put your business on hold. And when I have an amazing son too, there has to be an aspect of trust in God that he's gonna like hold that place for you. And that's what I've kind of been holding on to is like, you know, God gave me my son, and yeah, he does take away from my business quite a bit, you know, the time I get to work in painting and doing what I love. And sometimes I do have that fear of missing out mentality, but at the same time, I heard something that said that how good you rest, how well you rest is in direct correlation to how much you trust God. Because when you're in rest, you're trusting that God's going to hold your place for you.
I don't like it because it hits too close to home.
Well, I totally understand. I mean, I have such an issue with rest and in general rest, you know, and even on Sundays when I'm like, oh, I gotta get in the studio. No, I'll just wait. I'll just hold off and take a break, give my body a break. You know, it's just an interesting perspective. That really blew my mind, and it's helped me a lot through this season with having a little boy and loving on him and instead of painting, which is my other love. So
well, you know, the painting's always going to be there and he's going to grow up. And managing your rest and your energy is really important. So another thing that I tell young people asking my opinion on running an art business is do all the heavy lifting in the morning when you're fresh.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes.
Sit down, do your designing. If you have a little face you have to paint that in the morning. And sometimes I have to stop myself from like packaging up art and going to the post office or whatever. I force myself. I'm going to design. I'm going to draw. I'm going to paint. You know, whatever it is that's creative. I'm going to do that in the morning. I'll have lunch, and then after lunch, I'll package up art and go to the post office or whatever.
Mindless tasks, if you will.
Yeah. It still needs to be done.
Yes.
But it doesn't require that energy that painting and you know. I always say like painting is making 10,000 decisions a minute.
Yes.
And so if you paint for 8 hours, you will feel drained like you dug a ditch. The mind power that you've been using, it's the decision making. Sometimes I'll knock off, you know, at the weekend and I'll say to my wife, I'm like, you get to pick where we're dining out.
Yes,
You know?
you would love, when we hang up here, I gotta send you this poem, unless you may have seen it on my Instagram here recently, but Stephen Pressfield he has a poem and it's called The Artist's Work. And it's purely talking about all of the toil that we have in our brains as artists. And it relates it to like the physical labor, like the manual labor, like digging a ditch. And it's such a great poem because it expresses that perfectly and of course beautifully because it's Stephen Pressfield. I appreciate you being vulnerable about your dad and answering that question because I think there's just a lot happening right now in the world and especially in our country. I think it's really important to continue creating even when times are really tough sometimes.
I can share a recent event.
Yeah.
So last year about this time, I'm going to get a little choked up here. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's all right.
Our little dog died. And we'd had him for 18 years. We'd had him for half our marriage.
Gosh, that's a long time.
And I mean, it wasn't unexpected. He was 18.
Yes.
He was, it stinks whenever you lose any dog, but sometimes you have a dog that you have an extra special bond with. Well,
Yeah.
this was this guy.
Mm,
But I found that painting helped me
mm.
get through that period of sadness.
And was that because it took your mind off of your
Yep.
dog, or because you got your mind off of it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Because, there are times when you're doing things that require concentration where you can't think about other stuff.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I mean, the bad thoughts, they worm their way in, but
Hmm.
then you go for periods while you're working where you're not thinking about it. Then you realize, oh, I haven't thought about it in an hour. I haven't thought about it in 4 hours. I haven't thought about it in a day. The periods get longer. And so,
Yes.
there's a reason they use art as therapy,
Absolutely.
for people who have emotional issues and things. And
Yes.
we're all human. We all have emotional ups and downs in life. And,
Yes.
sometimes the art thing can help, and sometimes it needs to go on hold for a little while.
Yeah, and it's cool. Art is cool because it's very powerful. It can either be something that you use as a tool to forget the issue, or you can use it as a tool to express the issue. And so I've always admired artists that look at this abstract painting and they say, oh, well, this is when I was going through this period of time, and this expresses the emotion I was feeling. Well, like for me, all of my artwork is very representational. So I can't point out a car, and I'm sure for you too, you can't paint a car and be like, oh, I painted this when my dog died. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
correlate, you know what I mean? But
no.
it's
And
cool.
I don't want that for my art
I don't
either.
either. Yeah, I don't either. Yeah,
There's so much ugly in the world that I
absolutely.
really just want to create things of beauty that uplift
Yes.
people.
Yes, thank you
You
for
know?
saying that. Gosh, I
And,
I totally resonate with that.
and I don't like ugly art.
Yes.
I mean, I can appreciate the technical skill that goes into
Oh, yes.
a
Yeah.
lot of modern art that's morbid or ugly. I get the skill. It does nothing for me. If you took a tour around my house, you would not find any of that kind of work because
Same.
life is hard enough.
Yes.
Why do I want to dwell there in my work?
And it was hard for me at first when I was starting to apply for these galleries and shows, and they would ask me the meaning behind some of my paintings, and I'm like, there is no meaning. I think this is just a really cool place or a really cool looking car, and there's not really any deeper meaning. It's just it's what I love, and it makes me smile, and I know the audience I've gained thus far, they seem to really like it too, and
Yeah.
there's not a deeper meaning. And so I used to struggle with the fact that well, maybe it's not really meaningful because it doesn't have a deeper meaning, but I've learned very much the opposite. It does have a meaning. It makes people happy. It brings them to a nostalgic place or a memory that they had.
Yep. And
So
there are
that's
some artists out there that are really good at working in themes or whatever, like tiki artist Ken Ruzick. He
okay.
quite often includes political statements and things in his work. Of course, his paintings are chock full of,
Yes.
crazy ideas and commentary on society and stuff like that.
Right.
But that's never been my forte. I am an admirer of beauty. And even when I
Mm.
was doing automobiles full time, which I'm not now, I'm doing the tiki stuff full time, I
Yeah.
would still do things like rather than just paint a car, I would find something on that car that was iconic to it. And I
Yes.
would do a close up of that. Well, here's an example. You see that piece right behind me?
Yes.
So that's a 37 Hudson grill, which is an incredible Art Deco grill.
Yes.
And that, what I'm trying to, the story I'm trying to tell there is I want the viewer to pause for a moment and take in just this one aspect of that car.
Mm.
The stunning design work of this car and the beauty of it. Yeah, the whole car is beautiful and it's interesting from a nostalgic point of view.
Of
But
course.
that grill, Max Grundy and I we'd walk around swap meets together and we'd pick up this weird tail light, a beehive looking thing or something. And we'd talk about this was some designer's life for 6 months in 1936,
Yes. Yes.
and to appreciate the beauty of it. So I guess what I'm saying is my work always strove to tell a story, but it wasn't necessarily to be a commentator on society.
Absolutely. My work is very similar in that aesthetic. Well, now that we're talking about art, okay, so we were in your life story, you were talking about your bad paintings in acrylic. So you started studying the oil aspect, the oil painting tools and mediums.
Yep.
How did you transition from these terrible, in your words, awful paintings to something that you actually started to be like, wow, this is something I could sell to the public? What was that transition like?
Repetition. I always tell people anything you do all day, every day, you're going to get good at. If you're a tool and die maker or a watch repair person, anything you do all day, every day, music, practicing the piano, you practice the piano all day, every day for a year, you're going to be a lot better at the end of that year than you were when you started.
Absolutely. So do you remember the first time that you sold an oil painting that you were proud of?
Well, I will say this, all of those early paintings did sell, and some of them pretty quickly. That being said, they were at a level that they were saleable. I did pretty good on them money-wise. But I think one of the keys to being an artist is artists are on a journey of exploration, and it never stops till the day you die. I was always striving to be better. I was always striving to learn new techniques. I was always
level up. Yeah.
level up. That's right.
Yeah.
And you know how it is, like, even with like games or drawing, you do it. You're like, oh, there's no improvement. What's going on? Then one day you'll wake up and boom, everything clicks and you can do it.
Yes.
And I don't know what that is. It's the myelin sheath wrapping around the pathways in our brain or something. I don't know what it is. It's the 10,000 hours of practice thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just saw they took two groups of potters, and these people had never thrown a pot at all.
Okay.
And in one group, they had to make one pot. This was like for an 8-hour day.
Okay.
They had to make one pot. For the other group, they had to make like 10 pots in this 8-hour day.
Okay.
And the ones at the end who had the better pots were the ones who made the 10, not focused on making the one perfectly.
Wow.
And that's because they were learning, oh, if I do this, it's going to crumple in on itself.
Yeah.
I mean, they were learning the pitfalls as they went. And you only do that by doing it when you're doing it badly. Keep doing it when you're doing it badly.
That's an insane situation because you would think that it would be the other one that would
think that. And it blew my mind too.
Wow. But then you're so right because, if you're doing it over and over and over again, and unfortunately you may be failing at it over and over and over again, the failure forces you to find a different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Find a different way, learn the material.
Yes. Yeah.
There are technical limitations to every medium we work in, be it oil paint or clay or wood block carving. There are technical limitations to all of that we have to master.
Yes.
So that we're not limited by our lack of ability. We're only limited by our imagination.
How did you come up with the Green Girl concept? Let's tell the listeners what that is before they're like, Green Girl, what the heck? So what are the Green Girl paintings? So
my Green Girl paintings they're pretty girls. I have done some men, but they're generally pretty girls in tiki garb, Hawaiian shirts or classic Alfred Shaheen dresses. Sometimes they'll have a lei, they'll have a hair flower. I'm servicing the tiki subculture with this work. And so it all has a tropical feel, a very 40s vibe, sometimes a 60s vibe. I love working in those with those kind of style cues. The way I paint is kind of old fashioned looking anyhow.
I agree.
So,
yeah.
Which I love because I feel like I'm painting like my heroes,
Yes. Your style alone, no matter what you're painting, definitely has that vintage quality to it.
Which was something that I specifically sent out to do.
Really? That's very cool.
Like I said, I've worked in all mediums. I could still do a cutaway of a shock absorber with an airbrush and it would look photorealistic.
You could always fall back on that if
I could. If only anybody bought airbrush illustration any longer.
Yeah.
I think every artist should learn how to work in a photorealistic manner because if you can execute photorealism, you are mastering your skill.
Oh, that's
but
yes.
I like to see the artist's hand at work.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you're working in photorealism, I don't see your design decisions. I don't see your decision on how to lay that brush stroke in. I want to see the artist's personality and the artist's hand come through. So I look at working in a photorealistic way, like learning how to draw the figure realistically, even if you're going to do cartoon work like Glenn Barr.
Yes, yes. It's
You know what
like
I mean?
knowing the rules, and then once you know the rules really well, you can break them, and then that's where I
Yes.
believe an artist finds their style.
Yes. Our only limit should be our imagination, not our
Yes,
lack of ability. If I come up with an idea, I want to be able to execute it.
yes.
And that
Oh
means
man.
practicing, like a baseball player picks up 3 bats to swing them and then
Yes,
drops it and just hits with the one because he's going to be much better with that one, but he's warmed up his muscles with the three.
absolutely. That's a great analogy.
Here's another God thing that happened.
Okay, love those.
So I was getting very tired of painting sheet metal.
Okay.
I'd painted it since I got out of art school at the age of 21. And I was looking to do something else, and I was literally praying for the Lord to bring me something else to do, to open a door with another direction for me to go with my work.
I totally get that.
And
Yes.
so I've had friends in and around the tiki scene for decades now,
Okay.
but I was never part of the scene. I mean, I'd been to events. I like the scene. I have some of this stuff in my house, like this piece here is a carving by a friend of mine named Marcus Thorne, who's a tiki carver in Australia. And I've had that for 10, 12 years now. But,
So cool.
but so what happened was when pandemic hit, I was looking for something new to do. We were all locked down, so I knew I wasn't going to be doing any shows,
Those,
right?
yeah.
I thought now's the time to start something new. And I had been feeling like my figure drawing had gotten really rusty. Like
Mm.
I hadn't drawn a figure just to draw the figure in years and years and years. And so when I sat down to try and draw, and it wasn't coming back. And I felt like a student again.
Wow.
So I went online and I found this guy, Michael Matisse, I think his name is, and he teaches a way of drawing the figure called drawing with force. I recommend it to anyone because what it does is it creates a system of drawing, a way of thinking about drawing the figure that allows you to draw your figures with such fluidity. You'll never draw these like stiff,
Really?
draw the cylinder. Now that's the forearm. Draw the cylinder. That's the bicep. No, you
Yeah.
draw your figure drawing will be so fluid, and you'll find you can even start constructing figures out of your head.
Okay, I need to take that because I
Oh
draw
yeah.
figures so much.
And so it's an online course.
Okay,
And
that's way
I think it
cool.
was like, I don't know, it was like $100 or $200.
Wow.
And it takes you like, I went back to the beginning, like I'd never had a figure drawing class. And I
Yes.
started with this system from the very beginning. And I went through the whole system, and
Cool.
my figure drawing got so good. And so during pandemic, I would sit in my studio and I had a big thing of hot press newsprint and a big
Oh,
like wax crayon.
oh,
And
I
I
love
just
that.
drew figures for like 6, 7 hours a day. At the end of the day, I'd have a pile of newsprint this high on the floor in my studio because they're individual sheets, and I would draw them and then I would throw them on the floor. And by the
That's
time
amazing.
pandemic was done, my figure drawing was really improved, and I was really excited about drawing and this kind of thing again. I decided I was going to start submitting some pieces of art to the art shows they have at Tiki Oasis events. There's a
Okay.
Tiki Oasis event in San Diego and one here in Scottsdale. I had no plans on like taking my booth and setting up and selling art at a Tiki event. I just thought I'll submit a couple of pieces because they're different than sheet metal, and maybe I'll sell a painting or two and make some money.
Okay.
So the very first one I was going to submit to, I thought, okay, my figure drawing is good. I want to do a pretty girl.
Okay.
And so I started designing this painting, and I was just going to do her in just like kind of boring old normal flesh tones. I was looking at it and I was like, this is boring. And then I remembered a Russian painter named Trechikov from the 50s that everybody in the tiki scene knows Trechikov because he was famous for painting these Chinese girls with green blue tinted skin. And he would paint African girls with blue skin and stuff. And they were really interesting. And
Yeah.
so I knew that people would understand the reference I was making. So I painted this green girl and I showed it online, and people wanted to buy it immediately. I was born at night, but not last night. So I painted another one, and then it sold. And then so I painted another one. 4 years later, all I'm painting are green girls. Now, not all I'm painting. I paint mermaids in sepia, and I paint like adventurers with khaki pants and pith helmets and,
Well, and I saw
crazy stuff.
your Gilligan's Island.
The Skipper, Gilligan, and Mr. Howell.
Yes, I
know.
loved those. But what I saw of your newest artwork outside of your Green Girls were those mermaid
Yeah.
paintings, which I loved those because you took a vintage bubble glass frame,
Yeah.
but you painted that sepia vintage looking mermaid in it.
I paint the mermaid on the canvas and put it in the frame. And then on the bubble glass, I paint on the back side of the bubble glass.
Okay.
Like I've got one that's called Danger from the Deep. And it's a mermaid like swimming like towards the surface.
Yes.
And coming up, painted on the glass is a graphic octopus. arms.
Yes, I saw the tentacles. Yeah,
Tentacles, yeah.
that's
And
awesome.
so that's something I do quite often. In fact, almost all the time. I'll paint in a realist fashion the girl. I'll lay a graphic over it
Yes.
that is reminiscent of old matchbook art
Yes.
or menu cover art. I actually sat down one day and was when I was trying to decide where to go with my art, I was like, I love graphic design. Do I want to be do I want to just focus on good graphic illustration? I love oil painting.
Yeah.
And then I was like, maybe I can combine the two. I was telling you how I would study those vintage movie posters.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at a movie poster from the 40s, it always would have like a painted man and a woman in an embrace.
Yes.
And then it would have all the copy on it.
Yes.
That was
And it was like,
graphic.
yeah, it was like 3-dimensional versus very flat and 2-dimensional.
Yeah. So you'd have
yeah.
a rendered oil painting
Yes.
with all this graphic work over the top. And I loved the way that looked.
I love that aesthetic too. I think that is so cool. Yes, that's
So
so
that's
cool.
why I started putting the two together. I could
Yes.
get my creative yayas for the graphic work
Yes.
on the same piece that I was getting my creative yayas doing the oil painting.
Man, and it totally ties your story together. That makes me love it even more. I loved it before I really got to know your story, and now I'm like, that is you on a canvas.
Totally like me on a canvas.
Yeah.
It's totally God, because if I hadn't have done like all of these crazy other things that I'd done in the art world, I wouldn't have never got to where it is now.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
almost like in the movies when they put all the pictures and the papers up and they put the push pins in and they put the
Yes.
string, and it leads to where they're at. I can see the threads of where
Yeah.
God's hand was at work leading me.
Yeah, even maybe when you didn't know it 100%. Yeah.
I used to almost get insulted if somebody said, "Oh, you're so talented." I worked really hard
Yes. Yeah.
to get to a certain level. Really hard. Like my fingers didn't bleed, but really hard. And I used to take it like if somebody said you're so talented or you have a God-given gift, Michelangelo himself said, "You wouldn't be so amazed at my mastery if you'd have seen what I did when I started." I paraphrase that, but
Yeah.
and it's what I go back to. If something you do all day, every day, you're going to get good at.
Yes.
But the talent thing, I've come in later years to, there is a thing called talent.
Okay.
And what it is, it's a spiritual aspect of God has a plan for each of our lives.
Yes.
His plan for my life was to be a creative. And I'm hoping it was to be a painter,
Obviously you've had success in your painting career. If you did not have success in your painting career, would you take that as a sign of like, hey, this isn't what God wanted me to do?
I don't know how to answer that. I've always been led back to being an artist,
Yeah.
even
Yeah, because
when I
sometimes
was-
God will give you something and it's going to be really hard and you won't succeed at it right away. That doesn't actually mean that it's not what he wants you to do, because he's going to give you stuff that is really hard sometimes. Even Jesus didn't want to go to the cross.
Right. Take this from me,
Yeah. He said, but
Yeah.
if it's your will, then thy will be done, or however he said that so gracefully.
What the talent is the willingness to keep doing it when you're doing it badly. It's the love of it, the drawing toward it. Because we've all gone through periods where what we're doing is crap and we know it, but we can see in our mind, I know I can do this,
Yes.
but I can't do it right now.
Like, I believe everybody has a talent that God gave them, because it says
Yep.
that in the Bible. I just posted something in the membership that has the Bible verse. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. I mean, it says it right there, like we each have a gift, but I think for some people it takes a little bit longer to find that gift. And the gift is your talent, something that you're naturally good at. Here's the thing, like I think if you're naturally good at something, it doesn't mean that you're going to excel at it because you still have to work. You still have to put the effort in to make yourself better, to do the work to get the job done. You and I are both naturally talented artists. That's what God gave us as our gift to serve others. But if we just sat on our hands, it doesn't matter.
You know what? It gets down to values then. So one part of it is spiritual. God put a seed in you
Yes.
to be something.
Yes.
And the other part of it is developing that seed, watering it, nurturing it. And you can't do it alone. Like I had my folks, I have my wife that supports me,
Absolutely.
but it's, the value thing, it's work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
If there were, man, I wish like you could give people a pill and it would instill in them a work ethic. I had a lousy work ethic when I was young, but I didn't want to explain my art. I didn't want to have to explain away problems with my art. And the only way to get to where you don't have to explain away why your art isn't good enough is to get good.
Wow. I freaking love that. That is so true.
And all artists go through that. You show it to somebody, go, well, I have trouble with hands.
Yeah.
Well, if you have trouble with hands, spend about a month drawing nothing but hands, and you won't have trouble with hands.
Yeah, and then you can show that work and you can be legitimately proud of it instead of making excuses for why certain areas don't work well for you or someone may question it or whatever. Gosh, that's a great piece of advice for myself. Every creative person really. Yeah, wow, that's and the only way to not be in that position is to keep learning, like you said.
Yep, and keep doing it when you're doing it badly. And the cool thing about doing that then is that you do develop your own style. And my problem for a lot of years is I didn't have a style because of all the ad work that I'd done. I'd done everybody else's style and never developed one of my own.
I very much was the same way. I was doing commission work in all different types of mediums. Even on my website, I had it listed by medium instead of by size, like what people could choose. And that's why I came up with my She's Been Everywhere series, because I'm like, who the heck am I as an artist? I don't even know. I don't even know what I like to do. I don't know what I like to draw. I had an idea of what worked, but I just had to make that focused effort. This is the medium. This is the imagery. This is what I'm doing. And man, it changed my life when I made that decision. It was crazy, crazy.
And if you can find a way to do something different, God gave me this idea to do the green skin. It really can set you apart. When you go to an audition for like a TV show, you sit in a room and there's like 15 guys that look just like you. Okay.
That would be so weird.
Yeah. And there'll be a guy there and you'll go, oh man, if I was casting this commercial, and this is in your head.
Yeah.
If I was casting this commercial, I'd cast that guy because he's exactly what I pictured when I read this script. I would hear these guys go in the room. I'd be all sweating because he's like the perfect guy for the role. And he'd go in there and he would give them the most mundane reading. And I'd go, okay, I'm going to do something different.
Yes.
Even if it's wrong, it's going to be different, and it's the same way with art. Everybody starts out kind of copying their heroes, but it's a tool. You got to move on.
So you're painting hot rods and you built this audience up that loved your hot rod paintings. And then God gave you this new thing and you ran with it and you sold a couple paintings. Did you pull a different audience? How did you do that? How did you change from hot rods to green girls and get the eyes on your paintings?
It was overnight and it wasn't me. The only thing I did was when the door opened, I walked through it. I give all credit to Jesus. I really do. It was answered prayer. I spent a lot of time in prayer, seeking direction for my work.
Yeah.
And I was kind of at the end of my rope with the hot rod work, not to go negative, but selling high-end hot rod paintings to somebody who says, man, I love your work, but I got to buy beer this weekend. It's heart-wrenching sometimes. And I was kind of at the end of my rope with it. And when I started with the Green Girls, they immediately got attention. And I was at a show in Palm Springs called Tiki Caliente.
Yes.
And the guy who puts that on is named Rory Schneider. He owns the Reef. He owns Sancho's there at the Caliente Tropics in Palm Springs. Yes. And he became a great cheerleader for me. And he started telling people about me. He bought a number of my pieces and put one of them in his bar. He invited me to have a two-man show with mug maker John Mulder, which exposed me more. he spoke to a man who publishes an Exotica Modern magazine, and he got him to put me on the cover of Exotica Modern magazine. Just a number of people went to bat for me, and these were things that I could not have engineered. They were just a total blessing from God. And
Well, and all the while you were painting your heart out.
yes, I paint a lot.
Like you made so much artwork. Like you
Yes.
have so much artwork. It's so inspiring to me that you have so much inventory, for lack of better words. It's so much more special than that, but it is truly inventory that you can take to multiple shows a month because you do have that collective of artwork.
Well, the blessed thing was the first couple of years, I was mostly selling out at the shows. So I had to make
Yeah.
all new art for the next show.
Wow, that is
And
so
I make
cool.
most of my money through the sale of originals, not prints. But I like that because I like to create a lot. I usually work on like 5 paintings at a time. Not to pat myself on the back, but I told God one time, I said, if you open the door, I'll walk through it, even if I'm scared.
Yes.
And so the people in the tiki scene are incredibly supportive,
Yeah.
wonderful people that love art. It's not a competition between a piece of art or they got to buy shock absorbers for
Yeah.
their ballet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a different audience, I think.
Yes. And,
Yeah.
a lot of times, sadly, automotive art doesn't get the respect that it should.
I fully agree with that. Yes.
I've approached galleries that won't take it from lowbrow up to Tom Fritz. Now, there are people out there that apparently make great money off it, but I never could find the door to break into that. I mean,
Yeah.
I was selling it at Barrett Jackson auction for a few years, and it was still a nightmare. I was set up in this booth that cost me like $5,000 across from a foot massager, an electric foot massager, and the foot massagers are flying out the door. And I'm talking to a guy who tells me he's got 69 chargers in all 4 or 5 of the colors they came from the factory in. But if he spent $600 on a print of my orange charger that I painted, his wife would kill him.
Oh,
What do you
man.
do with that? Except lower your prices, and I wasn't willing to do that.
Yeah, I can't tell you what you do with that. I mean, I've been in that boat with you before, and I do know some people that have made it through that narrow gate with the automotive
Yeah.
art.
And there's a lot of really good automotive artists out there, but
Oh,
a
yes,
lot of
yes.
them are struggling.
And I totally get the whole booth space thing. Let's change gears a little bit because I do want to talk about your booth space. The coolest thing to me about your current booth setup is, and don't take this as an insult, of course, because they say that the frame should always come secondary to the artwork, but I believe that your frames are part of your paintings. Is that something that you plan? Because all of your paintings have a different frame, but they are stunning and they always complement your painting so beautifully.
It is a part of the plan.
Okay.
And the way it works out is I hunt vintage frames. I love vintage frames, and I even like them beat up and flaking, and because I paint in such an old-fashioned style, they
Yeah.
feel right.
It just feels like one whole piece that you just found in a cool shop or, a cool
Yes.
antique shop or something. I love that.
So what I do is I make my own canvases. So like I like linen rather than cotton duct
Okay.
because the linen has an uneven warp and weft to the weave.
Oh,
And you'll get
wow.
like weird knobbies, and it's a totally natural product. It's not like super processed like the threads in cotton canvas.
And it doesn't have like a coating on it or anything, or does it?
You can buy it raw. And then I
Wow.
glue it to wood panels. So that allows me, like when I buy one of those like oval bubble glasses, I can cut out a wood panel and mount the canvas to it. Like I'm working on another mermaid right now. What I did was I went in my studio, and I have dozens of frames now because now they find me. People
Yes.
know that I like vintage frames, and they will bring them to me at my booth. I'll have in mind what I'm wanting to do, as far as mood of the piece goes. And so then I'll go and I'll like look through my frame. This one kind of is the vibe I'm looking for the mood of the piece I want to paint. So like with the mermaids, they're generally going to be in sepia.
Yes.
And I do them up like old Ziegfeld Follies girls from
Okay,
the
yes.
teens.
Yes.
With lots of pearls and things. And so I'll find a frame that fits that vibe. Then I'll
Yes.
make a canvas for it. Then once I've got the canvas size down, then I start designing.
Wow.
And I'm a big believer in, like I said earlier, doing that heavy lifting with the designing. And I will spend days designing.
do you take your own reference photos or do you pull from older paintings that you've done before? How does that work?
So sometimes I work from found photos, like literally Ziegfeld girls,
Yes, yes.
or if I find like a cool picture of Carol Lombard or Rita Hayworth. If I find a picture like that moves me, I'll use that to start with. But I almost always will like tropical it up, put her in a floral dress or a hair
Yes.
flower or something. What I'm
Okay.
looking for is like great lighting. Sometimes I will shoot reference. I do a lot of commission work. A lot of people want me to paint their wives as green girls.
Wow, I saw
And
one on your
so
website that I was like, the lady was holding the piece, and I was like, that looks just like her. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it is her because I read your little
yep.
caption. It said commission.
For that, I don't want people sending me crappy photos to work from. So if I can get
Yes.
them to come to a show, wear what they want to wear, do their hair up, do their makeup, then
Yes.
I'll go and I'll take like a big white bounce board and I'll have the husband hold the bounce board to get light where
Oh
I want it.
man, that's
And I'll
cool.
take 50 photos looking for that 1 or 2 photos that has the magic in. There are models out there that sell model packs.
Okay.
So they'll shoot 100 photos wearing like a bikini
Yes.
in different poses with different lighting, and you
Yeah.
can buy them for, $20. I might have a great piece of reference that I shot a woman that I'm doing a commission of.
Yeah.
And in one photo, her face is just perfect. The chin's at the right level, the light's raking across it, but her hand's weird.
Yeah.
But I've got another one 3 photos away from that where the hand's great. And so I'll bring that in and like graft it on or something,
Yes, yes.
you know.
That's
Or,
awesome.
or if that doesn't work, literally whip out the drawing pad and draw it. So like my color comps will be part drawing, part photograph, like a cobbled together collage.
I would love to see some of those because sometimes those are the most interesting, you know?
No one gets to look behind the curtain. I'll tell my own secrets, but nobody gets to see it.
Yeah, yeah. Those will come out whenever your legacy starts to come out after you're long gone.
Right.
Those
Exactly.
are those are the special little maps that only certain people get to see for now.
That's right. And the tiki community is all about the aesthetic.
Yeah.
It's about the vintage wear. It's about the way they decorate their homes. They build full on tiki bars in their homes, and they're full of art.
That's so cool. And a lot of things with both mid-century and tiki, I've noticed are very like I think it's just that era, honestly. Everything that was made was designed for both function and form. And that's why that
Yes.
that whole 60s or late 50s, early 60s era is so intriguing to a lot of creative people is because you may have this amazing sofa, but it also is a beautiful sculptural piece at your living room. It's a conversational piece. And I think about like the old TV units, like those were gorgeous bars and TVs, but they also
Yeah.
were just beautiful pieces of artwork. I love that about your aesthetic because you can see that in your art. Like your artwork is timeless. That's what it is.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
was born in the 60s and I still remember the Mad Men furniture.
I mean, I'm looking
And
at is that your living room, I'm assuming?
yeah, well, so
Yes.
a lot of my aesthetic is like 1930s streamlined.
I actually saw a picture on your Instagram of that kind of vignette with your painting in the background, and I honestly thought at first it was one of those storefront art apps that you like, plug
Yeah,
your
you can
art
put your own
into.
picture on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I was like, wait a minute, and I started reading the comments, and it's
we love our house and almost all of our furniture is vintage.
yeah.
It's made better than the modern junk. I bought a coffee table set from the 50s and you could have stood on that coffee table.
Oh yeah,
People think nothing of restoring a craftsman era house, a Victorian era house, and furnishing it with that era furniture.
yes,
But we just did it with like, a mid-century house, not a mid-century modern, like a flat roof Palm Springs,
yeah,
you
dream
know,
home.
dream home,
Yeah,
but a
yeah,
mid-century modest, just a house that was made in the 60s that's,
yes,
still had a spot where the phone hung on the wall, you
yes.
know.
I should ask you this question. We're talking about all these old things. I'm in my early 30s, but a lot of people younger than me, they don't have like a lot of respect for, they don't have any interest in the old stuff. I wonder what the craftsmen are going to be like. What are craftsmen going to be making 30 years from now, because there's so much technology. And I'm not saying that you can't be creative and be someone that works with technology, but there's so much technology and there's so much machinery now. Craftsmen are becoming fewer and fewer, once you get outside of our industry and our tastes and interests in light, if you really step into the real world, it's like, dang, there's not really a lot of people that just make furniture here in America anymore.
You've heard the old stories about like, where did all the buggy whip makers go when the car came around? Well, there's still somebody out there making buggy whips because
Yeah.
there's still a need for them. Now, not on the scale that there was in 1910,
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
But there's somebody out there who's loves the craft of making a buggy whip. There's a whole community out there called makers.
That's true.
So
yes.
I think it's just part of the human being wants to make things with their hand. I'm all for automation. I'm all for computers. They're tools to make our life easier, hopefully, but it doesn't scratch the same itch. They become a part of our process, but they're not the process.
Yes, and just like when the photographer came out and then people said that the drawings are going to go away or whatever. It's like, no,
portrait painters will go away.
Yeah, well, no, it found its own niche, and there's always going to be niches of people.
A lot of artists are getting terrified with AI because you can basically type in, give me a green girl in James Owens style, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have a digital print that's basically a copy of a style.
Right.
And so people like you and I are going to become more valuable. What's more fun, watching a magician do a trick in a movie or watching a magician live on stage 6 feet in front of you?
That's true. That's very true.
What we do with our hand-eye coordination and our ability to know color and light, it's almost like a magic trick. People are always going to be interested in watching people do amazing things.
Yes. And no matter how good AI gets, like it will never compare. There's no human aspect to it no matter what, and humans crave other human aspect. Like human soul craves human soul.
And it's digital art, which there's a place for digital art, but there are still galleries that won't touch it. We've had digital art for 30 odd years now, and there are still galleries that don't look at it as real art.
Yes.
I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's the way it is. What you said about people are always going to be seeking out the human element. So 2 movies that I can think of off the top of my head. One is the Nicolas Cage movie, Gone in 60 Seconds.
Oh, of course. Yes.
With the Mustang.
Yes.
And I remember I was sitting in the movie theater watching that movie at the end when it jumps.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's digital. And I was so angry because I'd seen the original where this maniac literally jumped this old Mustang, like, I don't know how far it was, 50 yards or something. It was crazy.
Insane. Yeah.
And that's exciting. Watching a digital Mustang jump, I didn't care. Or the new movie that's out, it's a new Planet of the Apes movie. The apes are all digitally rendered, and so they move realistically and everything.
Yes.
But I saw the ads for it, and I went, I'd rather watch the original where I know there's a real actor in there. Now, I'm sure there was an actor wearing, ping pong balls all over his body to perform the monkey. But I'm looking at an animation. I'm looking at an animated movie.
Yeah.
And it doesn't move me as much as Roddy McDowell with the latex face on in Planet of the Apes moved me.
Yes, and it makes me think of the old photograph you see of the single person with all of the Star Wars models that they used for the movies.
Yeah, George Lucas standing in his vault. Yes.
Yeah, it's George Lucas. Yeah, that picture will always blow my mind because then every single element of the old Star Wars movies, there was like 20 hands on. There was so much talent in that. And I guess that's where I get nervous with AI is because, like you talk about even with your ad agency work, all of those jobs, all of those creative people, they aren't really, they're not needed.
So I got out of art school in 86.
Yeah.
And about 3 or 4 years from that time, the Macintosh hit with Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop.
Wow.
And I knew old school photographic retouchers. And the way they worked was if they were going to do an ad in a magazine this big, they would send the retoucher a print of an automobile that was like this big, like 3 feet wide by 2 feet high. They all worked very secretly. They had special formulas that they wouldn't share with anybody because they didn't want to give their secrets away.
Wow.
They would use things like laundry bluing to make things more white and like They would do all these crazy things
Yeah.
and all these secret formulas overnight. These extremely talented people had no work to do because the computer came in. I'm still in touch with some of the illustrators that I worked with when I started. None of them are illustrating any longer. They're oil painters or doing like their own,
Well, I mean, that's promising. They were able to, I guess, adapt is the word I keep coming back to, is like they were able to adapt into this new form of artwork. Hard for me to be positive about it because I do see, I have such love for the old movies and the old artwork and how things were done back in the old time. Even when I was a little girl, how things were done, which that was just in the 90s and that was before cell phones. So I always ask people if I can about their perspective on AI because there's so many ranging opinions about it.
I look at it like my print bin.
Hmm.
There are people out there that are going to be happy to buy a print.
Hmm.
They want the image, but having an original is not important to them. But I have other clients who wouldn't touch a print with a 10-foot pole. All they want is original art. And those people are always going to exist. I was doing some regular work for one of the Hot Rod magazines 12 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's when I bought my Wacom tablet because I thought, oh, it'll make life easier if I just do this digitally, then I can just send it to them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But then I went, well, this is dumb. If I do it in a traditional method, not only can I put the piece in the magazine and get paid for that, now I have an original piece of art to sell. Learning to think that way helps in business too. It's like, it sounds a little mercenary, but we're running a business here. It's like, how can I wring every dollar out of every image I create?
I recently just started offering people to purchase the framed version, the sketch of what I'm painting for them. So they can purchase obviously the commissioned painting, then they can also purchase the sketch, and then they can also purchase, because of the medium I use, they can also purchase the palette, a framed palette, which is a really cool story. It basically tells the story of the painting. It's a very cool side-by-side piece of art.
I like that idea. I might steal that.
Oh, please, yeah, if you want to, please do. I would love to hear your opinion on this is your God-given talent. How do you ask for money?
You know what? It's not a big deal.
There you go.
Don't make it a big deal. Here's what I say to people. If somebody comes to me and they want a commission, say the commission's going to be $2,500.
Okay.
I say to them, I just tell them up front. I say, for a piece that size, it's going to be $2,500. And the way I work is it's half up front and half on completion. It's just a way to make sure that the person who is hiring you has skin in the game.
Yes.
And it also allows you to have funds up front if you need to purchase supplies.
Yes.
You know, I told you I work on Belgian linen. Well, that stuff's not cheap. Belgian linen is freaking expensive. It's what I want. I can't get the same look using cheap cotton duck. It's a non-issue. They know they're hiring you to do something. You're not surprising them by asking them for money. Now, last year I did a commission piece for a wonderful couple, and I brought the piece to a show and gave it to them. And she was all smiles and was very polite and everything. And then a day later, I got a note from her saying, is it possible to change it? She was really upset. She did not like, the husband had taken the pictures on the sly. And so she didn't like do herself up the way she would have.
I totally understand. Yes.
So I told her, no problem. I made the change, no charge. It is more important to me to have happy customers than to wring another $800,000 out of somebody.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, because that person will now hopefully be your best source of good review.
Yes.
Yes.
So what she got to do was she sat down and with her girlfriend, did her hair and makeup, shot reference. I guided her on how to shoot the reference so that it would fit the painting, because I figured out a way to redo the head without having to do the whole painting over again. You know, when you're painting ladies, it's a fine line you want to walk. You want to make a likeness, but you don't want to play up the crow's feet or...
Absolutely. Yes, and you also don't want to make them look so young that it's insulting that you're trying to hide something.
Right.
Yes, I get that. I've also painted a couple people's wives as well, so I've had a little bit of experience in that,
It's
you know,
tricky.
putting them into a pinup model type thing. So yes, I get that.
But if you do it and you do it right and it succeeds and they're so happy, there's nothing better than that. And they placed the painting to where you see it when you walk in to their backyard
That's a huge compliment.
bar.
Wow.
Yes. Nobody goes in their backyard bar without smack dab running into this painting.
And maybe it is this story you just told, but do you have a painting or a commission that stands out to you as the one painting, the story you always tell, or the painting that you learn the most on? Is there a single painting that you can remember that you're like, yeah, that one was good?
Okay, I'll tell you about two paintings. I
Okay.
did a painting that was one of my biggest sellers called Roscoe Said Goodbye For Me. The painting was of like a 53 Cadillac convertible in an alley with all kinds of smoke around it. And then a woman from like the elbows down, pencil dress. So real shapely, holding a pistol, a smoking pistol in her hand. And there's a fedora on the ground, a fedora hat like this. That painting was the first one that I ever constructed where I was trying to lead the eye of the viewer. If you study painting, the first thing the human eye goes to is the human face. Well, I didn't have that in this painting.
Okay.
So the next thing the human eye looks to first is the brightest spot on the painting. So I put the brightest spot at the back of the Cadillac, which your eye will go right to the Cadillac.
Yes.
And it'll come to the front of the Cadillac, which led to the woman, which
Yes.
leads you down to the gun and then to the fedora.
Wow, and it tells the whole story.
It told the whole story. So I was kind of playing with visual psychology on that one.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I did a series of paintings where I was trying to do that, control how the viewer looked at the piece to tell the story. And then the other piece has more to do with when you're lost on a piece. So I did a painting of a deuce with a flat head. And all it was the flat head and a little bit of the firewall, the grill, and a little bit of the tire. And I painted it on like a yellow ochre background. I was happy with the engine, but the overall piece was just blah. It was awful. And I couldn't figure out, I'm like, what is wrong with this thing? So I just was like, I don't know how to solve this. So I leaned it up against the wall in my studio, and it stayed there for probably a year. I'd stack other stuff on it. I'd pull it out and look at it. Still don't know how to solve this problem. And then one day I walked in and looked at it, and like that, I went, I got to paint the background completely black. Now, it was a black car, but when I painted the entire background completely black, the only thing that showed on the firewall and the grill surround were the highlights. The highlights told the story of the shape.
That's cool.
And so that led me to, first, it solved that problem on that painting, and it looked spectacular. It became my biggest seller ever. But what it also led me to begin to understand was, how much information do you need to give the viewer to tell the story you're trying to tell?
Yes.
Sometimes it's just a little flick of reflected sky on a deuce grill shell, and your eye goes, that's a deuce grill shell. It was like a revelation to me. And now I practice that in a lot of my paintings. I've done a couple of girls where like the dresses completely disappear into the background. And the only thing that tells the story of the feminine shape is like if the skin of the arm shows the curve of the breast, because the dress is black, you'll see that silhouette against her skin.
Yes.
So finding a way to engineer what can be left out, but still tell the story of the shape,
yes.
I find it a really fun challenge to do.
I used to have a ceramics teacher. He's passed now, but his biggest thing was negative space. He's like, I could care less what the vase looks like or whatever this 3D object looks like. He's like, I'm looking at all of this space around it. How is it sitting in the world? What is it? Yes. What space does it take out of the world? It's just a really unique way to look at life.
If you want to study composition and light, study cinematography.
Oh man, yes.
So like you were just talking about negative space. There's a movie, it's one of my favorite Westerns. It's a John Ford Western starring Henry Fonda called My Darling Clementine. The light in it is amazing. And dig this for a composition. So you've got the square of the screen. So back then it wasn't widescreen. It was like mostly square. All sky. And at the bottom is the desert and this road with a wagon on it. But the screen is like all sky with this little wagon at the bottom. A cinematographer helps tell the story by the way he puts the images in the frame.
Yes, it's an otherwise mundane story, but the way that he frames out the image
can move you.
Yes, and it tells you just enough. That's so true. Let's kind of wrap this up. I want to ask you one more question. Is there a singular trait that you believe has helped you in your business or in your art practice?
Work ethic. Work ethic. You got to get up. I don't care if you're a night person and you want to
Yes.
start your painting at 10 o'clock at night, or maybe you have to. Maybe you have a family and everybody goes to sleep at 11 and that's when you have quiet time.
Yes.
Set a time and go to work every day. Even if you're not working on a painting,
Yes.
go in there and draw. Go in
Yes.
there and, go online and study great art. And
Hmm.
you know what? I find a big problem is a lot of people are interested in one thing. They're interested in anime. They're interested in hot rod art. They're interested in one thing. Open your mind up. I went through a period when I was getting burned out on the car stuff.
Yeah.
My whole feed was all cars, car art, cars, 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 car art, more art, car art. I started looking around on Instagram and going, oh, here's a woman that does pet portraits, but her work moves me. Oh, they do Japanese woodcut, block printing. And I started filling my feed with art that was not my kind of art,
Yes.
but it moved me for some reason. It began to open my mind. We get closeted in
Yes.
a very narrow set of visual cues, the flying eyeball, the rat fink. I love all that stuff, but we get set in these certain visual cues that are acceptable in our art. If you can be disciplined enough to stick to it when you're tired or when you're bored. For me, the work ethic thing, I learned it from my wife. My
Yes.
wife has an incredible work ethic. Let's face it, the life of an artist, sometimes, we want to be all bohemian and wear the beret and listen to the dialectic jazz. I'm not the kind of person who can send my wife to work her butt off while I'm lay around and hope the muse hits.
Oh man, and even then, I feel kind of guilty sometimes because I'm doing what I love, even when I'm like working my ass off. And my husband, he likes his job, but man, I know there's some other things that he might want to be doing instead of what he
Yes,
does.
you're
And I
preaching
feel
to the
guilty a
choir.
little bit. And so it makes me work harder. Yeah, did you just say that? It makes you work harder?
It
Yeah.
does make me work harder.
Yeah, same here.
It makes me go, oh, I've been painting all day. I don't really feel like doing anything else. Oh, it's only another hour and a half. Okay, she's working, I'm working.
Yes, yeah, it definitely helps to have a teammate that it has equal motivation and ambition. My husband is very ambitious. He has, a couple different side jobs and he has his hobbies. They're similar to mine, but they're his own and he works at them just as much as I work at my business and my hobbies. It helps me, like you said, if he's working out in the garage on something, on his side business, then I'm not just going to be sitting on the couch watching HGTV, although sometimes that sounds
Oh,
great, but I love when we're both working together, even if it's not at the same thing.
yeah. I'll sometimes go in and sit down in Kathleen's office and she'll go, what's going on? And I'll be like, man, I just can't concentrate today,
Yeah.
And she'll be like,
Yeah.
well, take the day off. And I'm like, no, you're working, I'm working. I'll go clean the studio or something.
Yes. Wow, that's just how Morgan and I are. I'm so glad to hear that you have that. How long have you guys been married?
37 years?
Wow, that's wonderful.
We got married in
Congratulations.
86. Oh,
That's
and she's still my best friend
that's
and
awesome.
we do everything together. I'm a big believer that if you want to stay married, spend as much time as you can with your spouse,
Mm.
doing
Yes.
things, talking. We have friends that they don't even talk about the deep things of life and the travails and the joys of life. I don't know how they stay married.
Yes, I heard a podcast recently and they were interviewing a guy who was basically he was a very well-known marriage counselor and he was like, I have to actually physically tell people that it's important that 90 minutes a week you talk to your spouse. He's like, I have to remind people to do that in marriage counseling. And he was just kind of relating it back to like how busy we've become and how self-centered and very much social media centered that we've become. And he's like, I shouldn't have to remind a married couple to talk for more than 90 minutes a week. Like that shouldn't be a challenge.
When we drive to Palm Springs to do shows, it's 4 hours from here. We won't even
Okay.
turn the radio on because we're
Yeah.
talking,
Yes,
you
me and
know?
Morgan, we were saying like we should start bringing the microphone on some of our road trips because that's when we have the most in-depth,
Yep.
life-centered conversations about God and heaven and hell
Yep.
and
We do that
careers.
when we walk around the neighborhood too,
Yeah.
My website is car-noir.com. That's CAR-NOIR.com.
Yes.
You can find me on Instagram at James Owens Art, and Facebook is James Owens Car Noir.
Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and just sharing your wisdom, your knowledge that you've gained. And I think it's going to really bless a lot of people in their journey.
I've discovered in my later years that I like sharing this stuff. Man, I can't remember off the top of my head what my YouTube website is, but it's a series of videos where I teach tips and hints and tricks on how to be a better artist. It's a lot of work though. It was like 3 days to make one like 5-minute video. And it's like, I just don't have time to do it anymore. So I haven't made one in like 3 years.
Yeah, I noticed that. And I totally resonate with that because for me, like, I don't want to put out anything that's not polished and understandable, thought out, understandable. And unlike the culture of today's social media, like, I don't just want to show up with no makeup and my mom clothes on. I actually want to show up as a professional, and that takes effort and time, and I can't just whip these videos out, 24/7. That's why I'm doing this podcast once a month right now, because for one thing, I'm not just representing myself on this podcast. I want to represent y'all very professionally as best as I can. And so I don't want to put too much on my plate where I can't market and represent y'all, in the right light. I don't want it to be sloppy. And so it's a tough gig.
You're doing a great job with this. And I listened to all the ones that you've already published, and I really enjoyed it because it was a conversation. It wasn't just a list of questions. You're the Joe Rogan of art podcasts.
Get out of town. That is the best compliment I've heard all month. It's a tough ride when you start something new and you're not sure how it's going to go, and there's not a lot of like initial feedback. It's not an instant thing. And so I very, very much appreciate that, Jim. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to The Curated Craftsman. You can support this podcast and become a member of our creative community through the Hand, Head, and Heart Collective on Patreon. If you were inspired by this conversation, please leave a review, share the show, and subscribe.